Más de 1000 puestos de trabajo. 200.000 horas mensuales de servicios. Enfrentando entornos cambiantes. IAE se posicionó como una de las empresas de seguridad privada de mayor evolución en los últimos 10 años. Porque es una empresa especializada en protección patrimonial, con una visión clara de sus objetivos. Porque se desarrolla a partir de una mirada innovadora y profesional. Porque cuenta con personal altamente motivado. IAE valora a cada uno de sus colaboradores y los acompaña en su formación profesional. Porque ofrece una respuesta integral basada en profesionalismo, soluciones ágiles y mejores prácticas de seguridad. Porque trabaja a partir de un modelo basado en la sustentabilidad. Pero en especial, gracias a la confianza de importantes complejos residenciales, prestigiosas instituciones y empresas de primera línea que siguen eligiéndonos día a día. Todo esto convierte a IAE en una empresa de seguridad diferente. IAE, Seguridad Integral Empresaria.
Okay, good afternoon, Barbara. Thank you very much for coming. We are very pleased receiving you here at our IAE Summit in our 40th anniversary. And I will like to introduce all of you to Barbara. Barbara is a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School in Leadership. She's a well-known professor and academic. She wrote many books. And it's very interesting because although she has been teaching and consulting about leadership for many, many years, today she's going to put leadership upside down, or at least in another place related to the main topic of our summit, that is how to understand our revolutionary context. So we want to hear your thoughts and your ideas. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you all of you for welcoming me, and particularly to the organizers of the conference. It was very considerate of you to schedule today's event one day before a World Cup game, which I am going to get to see in Argentina. So thank you very much. The second introductory comment I want to make is that manifestly I'm an American. I'm from the United States, you all know that. But every word out of my mouth during my prepared remarks, and I'm going to try to keep them to about 20 or maybe a little more minutes, because I really hope to have a bit of a dialogue with the Dean in the remaining time. Every one of my comments pertains as much to Argentina as to the US, as much to China as to Brazil, as to Vietnam, as to Canada, as much to the private sector as to the public sector, as to the nonprofit sector. So please bear that in mind. My final introductory comment is going to be thank you, particularly to the speakers who spoke this morning, because they made incredibly apparent, in a way I couldn't even begin to do, that someone who leads in the digital age the way they would have led even 10 years ago, not to speak of 20 or 200 years ago, is a fool. So I'm here to talk about, I wouldn't necessarily say turning leadership upside down, but I would say that I'm going to try to get you to think about it in a somewhat new and different way. And in fact, as the Dean just said, I've written many, many books about leadership, but I would say that for the last 10 years, virtually every one of my books and articles has been somewhat critical of what I call the leadership industry. That is all this business about. How many of you have taken more than one leadership course? At least half. So I'm going to raise for you some fundamental questions about how we did learn leadership, how we do learn leadership, and how we should be learning leadership in the future. So, as you can see, I am into the idea that leadership changes. Leadership changes, followership changes, the world changes, which is why I talk about the leadership system. I never talk just about the leader anymore. And as you can see, I talk about democratic systems, and in particular, the limits on leaders in democratic systems that are now in trouble because leaders have not learned to change and to adapt, and the authoritarianism that we see, and the populism that we see, and the nationalism that we see is an outgrowth of some of the same phenomena that I'm talking about. So Leadership 2020 has to take these things into account. Leadership used to be taught this way. Lao Tzu, Confucius, Plato, Machiavelli, they fixated only on the person at the top. What was Machiavelli's most famous book called? The Prince. The person at the top. Popes and kings and queens, not the rest of us. However, things changed. With the Enlightenment, other people like you and I, for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to call them followers, people other than the leader, came into play. So you had, for example, Wollstonecraft, a great English woman writer, who said, what about the women? What about the women? Why are women not taken into account? Marx and Engels, instead of just the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, the last lines of the Communist Manifesto. I don't know if, I can't say this in the United States. People have barely heard of the Communist Manifesto. But in Argentina, it's maybe a little different. In any case, the last line, anybody know the last line of the Communist Manifesto? Oh my God, I'm in Argentina, nobody knows. Workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. In other words, people who had heretofore never before had a voice, had a say, other people, people other than leaders, were starting to demand the right to speak. That is the predecessor to what leaders are faced with today, and was most vividly articulated, I've heard the word revolution here several times, was most vividly articulated in the French and American revolutions, which were about overturning leaders in favor of followers. This continued. I don't need to go through these names with you. Every one of them was about power away from leaders and power to the people, a trend that has flat out continued to the present day. Some of the names you will know, some of them you might not know, but suffice it to say, people like Gandhi, Mandela, Martin Luther King, power to the people. Power away from those that have, power to the powerless. This continued. Why? Because ordinary people, one of my colleagues calls them the rise of the rest, ordinary people began to read. They became literate. They were able to communicate with each other. The Reformation, the attack on the Catholic Church by Martin Luther, another kind of revolution. the two revolutions that I spoke about earlier, and industrialization. All of it power devolving down from the top toward those in the middle and at the bottom. 21st century brings us to the present. Changes in culture have been so dramatic, I don't know where to begin. In the United States, when I'm asked to speak about when did the changes in culture start, I will typically say you can't point to them with a ring of a gong, but I will offer one name, and let me see if that name has a resonance in this country. The name is Monica Lewinsky. I guess it does. All right, so why is Monica Lewinsky a touchstone for me? Because once, and I will now talk about the United States, but this is endemic now. Once, am I allowed to talk about sex in Argentina? Is it okay?
Without taking your clothes, yes.
Okay, I'll be very, very careful. Once we knew, once the American, by the way, the American people spent 1998 fixated on this story. That's all we talked about for 1 year. Once American people knew precisely what the American president did in the White House Oval Office or with, if you want, I'm not talking about the Me Too movement here, this is well before the Me Too movement. Once we knew what the American president did to or with a 21-year-old White House intern, and once we felt, again, ordinary people, this is all about the rise of the follower, the distance between the American president and all the other American people collapsed. If there's a single moment that this took place, that was the moment. And it was also the beginning, and now this is bullet point number 2 of what my colleague spoke about this morning, which is changes in technology. And if you don't think, as I suggested earlier, that the digital revolution or the digital mindset or whatever language you want to use has changed relations between leaders and followers, I beg of you, think again. Changes in ideology. I don't know how familiar some of you are or all of you are with the American management literature, but the changes in ideology all come and resemble the so-called flattened hierarchy. The flattened hierarchy means leaders are put down, other people in the organization are risen up, and that's similar to other language that we now use, which is about worker participation and empowerment and teams. The word teams, teaming is now a verb. Who ever heard of teaming as a verb? It implies, again, equity. All of this is about limits on leaders. The rise of the follower, limits on leaders. Democratic leadership in liberal democracies, if you read the paper, if you go online, if you pay any attention to what's happening in the world, liberal democracies are in trouble, including in my own country, and do not, I'm so glad there's no Q&A here, because otherwise you would raise the name of Donald Trump and I would get sick and that would be really embarrassing. So very good that we're not having that. But liberal democracies are struggling for some of the reasons that I'm suggesting, and authoritarian systems, as I earlier suggested as well, are increasing in importance. And if you pay any attention, again, for example, the elections in Turkey, where the regime has already been in existence for over a decade and a half, and Turkish voters, in effect, gave Erdogan a pass for life, or at least for the near future. So authoritarianism is on the rise, exactly, particularly the Chinese model, which we can maybe come to if you want to raise questions about what's going on in China. But the respect for authoritarianism, instead of going down, which is what liberal democracies would like, authoritarian leaders, counterintuitively, are more successful than they have been in the recent past. Okay, Now let me get to how you need to think about leadership in a world in which leaders' powers are declining and other people's powers are rising. Number one, you have got to start de-emphasizing the leader. So if you're taking a leadership course or you're teaching in a leadership curriculum, pay less attention to the leader and more attention to the other two bullet points on this slide, because leadership is not about an individual. It is not about a person. It never was about a person, but it's even less about a person in the 21st century. Certainly as we get into the third decade of the 21st century, it is a system. Think about leadership as a system, as an isosceles triangle with three equal sides. Yes, leaders are important, but so are followers, meaning everybody else. You can call them stakeholders if you don't like the word followers. And the third thing, and again, these digital presentations this morning drove home the point better than I can, is context. The context within which leaders now are operating are so quickly changing, so powerful a factor in how you can lead and manage, that if you don't pay attention to, if you're so worried about yourself, developing your skills, and I need to learn how to mobilize, I need to learn how to adapt, I need to learn this, I need to learn that. If you're so fixated and obsessed with yourself, you will pay, as a leader, insufficient attention to followers and to contexts. I'm big on followership. I don't have the time to go into it. I think these slides may be distributed, but here you can read for yourselves what I believe to be true in the 21st century. Leaders are becoming less important, followers are becoming more important, and that leader-centrism, as I just suggested, is becoming increasingly antiquated a concept. How many of you in this room would call yourselves either leaders or managers? Raise your hands. Oh, it's very quiet. So most of you are stakeholders or subordinates or followers. Some of you raised your hands. If you are a leader, or if you want to become a leader or a manager, let's not get into the distinction between the two. And there is a distinction, which I again don't have time to go into. You will want to divide those who report to you into different categories. I've written a book called Followership. I developed these different types. I'm not going to go into the details. Suffice it to say here that if you're going to rank them or divide them by level of engagement, you yourselves know that people in your office or in your organization or in your community range from what I call isolates, people who are really separated from the system, who pay no attention, who, for example, don't even vote, to what I call diehards, that is, people who are willing to sacrifice themselves for the cause or for the individual. So followers are different types. Similarly, I am urging you, if you are leaders and managers or ever thinking of becoming leaders and managers, please become contextually aware. What do I mean by that? Develop your contextual expertise. If you're in a particular industry, learn the industry, not just your organization. Learn your industry. Become contextually intelligent. Learn how to apply what you learn to the different contexts. Pay attention to what is changing in the contexts. Country and culture. The fact that you're in Argentina, most of you are in Argentina, most of you will probably spend most of your lives as leaders and managers. It means that you need to understand Argentina, the country, the culture. Conversely, if you are transferred or you move to another country and culture and you want to lead or manage, you damn well better understand that country and culture, and so forth and so on. These are various changes in the context. Again, I don't want to go into them because I want to leave some time for conversation, so let me go very quickly through the remaining slides. This is a simple slide that talks about the decline of the CEO. Yes, in my country, probably in yours, CEOs earn more money than they ever did before. And the gap between those at the top and those at the bottom is as big as it's ever been before. But here is what CEOs now have to put up with. And by the way, all leaders, presidents of universities, their tenure is getting shorter and shorter. Why? Because they have to put up with stakeholders, noisy, follower others in ways they never used to have to. Activist investors and bossy boards. Ceaseless scrutiny and flatter hierarchies. Insistence on diversity, whole other conversation. I do a lot of work on women in leadership. Don't have time to talk about it here. It's a big deal in the States, and I know it's a big deal in this country too. There are many reasons, many of them not in the literature, on why still so few women at the top. Changing ideologies and the incessant scrutinizing. Leaders are under our watchful eye as they have never been before. I will go through these final few slides about triads very quickly. They're threesomes. Triad number one. The Harvard Business School says it educates leaders in its mission statement. Mission statement of the Harvard Kennedy School says it trains leaders. Mission statement of the Stanford Graduate School of Business says it develops leaders. My argument is that a good leadership learning process now includes education. It includes training, and it includes development. They do not mean the same thing. There are distinctions among leadership education, leadership training, and leadership development, which these institutions do not make, but they should, and you should. Triad number two, I spoke about it earlier. Leaders, followers, context. Leaders deserve our attention, but so do stakeholders, and so do contexts. Triad number three, leaders' major resources, power, authority, and influence. Power is reduced. Leaders simply don't have the power that they used to. Authority, which is associated with status, has been diminished in its value. We don't give a damn about authority anymore. Doesn't matter as much anymore. That means if you're learning how to lead, you're learning how to manage, your most valuable resource is interpersonal influence. Getting other people to do what you want them to do voluntarily. Very different from power, very different from authority. Triad number four. Define leadership. You can define it any way you want, but have in your head some clarity about what it means to you. Same with management. What do we mean by manager? How is a manager different from a leader? Are the words really interchangeable? Finally, this is my big thing now, professionalize the process. I was interested how the woman from Finland, Anna, spoke about how teachers in Finland need to be educated extensively, like doctors, lawyers, engineers. Guess what? Leaders need no education. They take one course and they think they're a leader. No licensing, no credentialing. I argue in my last book, which is called Professionalizing Leadership, that we should treat leaders, this is really the last slide here, we should professionalize leadership. We should treat it as seriously as we do training and educating and developing doctors and lawyers and teachers and engineers. Let's give our leaders the professionalizing process that they ideally deserve. Okay, we have a few minutes left for conversation.
Okay.
Are you up for it?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good. No. I am so not finished. I am so not finished. Save it. Go.
Okay, Barbara, do you have any examples? Because I know that you also have been coaching and very close to women leading.
Yes.
So I guess that maybe it's my own bias, but I guess maybe are women more prepared for for understanding followers and context, or is it a matter that we can learn too?
Well, I'm going to stick with the female part of your question.
Yeah.
I hope I'm going to respond as you would like me to. So I will speak about the American context now, which I know are, in this sense, Argentina are not the same, and I don't want to presume to know your context as well as, of course, my own. I have studied leadership the world over, and one of the things that interests me about women in leadership, and this is related to followership and related to context, but it's related to many other things as well, is why, given that in many Western countries, particularly the Scandinavian countries, but certainly in many Western countries, there has been a lot of emphasis on bringing women up, making more women leaders, having more diversity in organizations. Is diversity big in Argentina?
More or less.
More or less. It's a very big word in the United States. In other words, diversifying our leadership cadre. So the question that I've asked myself recently is, why is it that, in fact, the numbers of women are still tiny? In the United States, I'm going to have you guess, what is the percentage of women CEOs of top Fortune 500 companies? Just shout out a number, percentage.
15.
Lower than 15, keep on going lower. 5, somebody said 5. It's around 5. It could be even a little less than 5. In other words, about 25 years after we've had this big push to, and everybody's been thinking about it and how to do it and so forth and so on, 25 years later, there are still unbelievably few women who are CEOs of large publicly held companies. By the way, the figures at the top are low even in Scandinavia, which has made me recently ask, by the way, I've answered my own question, you will not be surprised to hear, but it has made me ask, why has this persisted? And I think there are complexities in this conversation having to do with women, guess what, they're the ones that get pregnant, women, guess what, they're the ones that breastfeed, complexities that don't typically enter the conversation about women in leadership in particular. By the way, the Me Too movement, do you have a Me Too movement in Argentina? That's a weak yes. I didn't get a rousing yes. It is going to make, you know how cute one of the things I've noticed since I've been here is how you all hug each other. It's not going to happen in a year. You're going to stop hugging each other because, especially men, women, it's like women are very nervous now. So political correctness is going to interfere with some of this very nice hugging.
So I get a little bit preoccupied because you're perceiving that this autocratic leadership style is like surfacing again.
Yes.
So how we can overcome this?
Well, this is a really, really, really serious question. And I have to say, if I were in a developing country, and then magically I was able to visit Shanghai, Beijing, and then I visited New York or Baltimore, and I knew about the dysfunctionality that we see in Europe. I see the dysfunctionality in the US. I see how China has worked in amazing ways, including bringing up countless millions from the depth of poverty in recent years. This is why this conversation about leadership is so important, because until liberal democracies do a better job of teaching a leadership cadre how to lead in this difficult context, the competition from autocratic systems is going to be very serious and formidable. I'm a liberal Democrat, but I'm not an idiot. And I look at the context in which the US is embedded, in which Argentina is embedded, and I see what's happening in the world. I realize that the challenges to the Americas and to Europe, most obviously, are very serious. These are not to be taken lightly. I don't know how many of you have paid attention, other than the World Cup, to what's happening in Europe, even in the last few days, the struggles to keep the European Union with the migration problems, what's happening to Angela Merkel in Germany. This is all relevant to us. It's not irrelevant, it's the context within all of us who are interested in leadership and management are operating.
Okay, so I get the message that to overcome this, we should look more for our followers and for the context, and to get strict to some values that are rooted in a more democratic and more open.
So let's say you and I have 24 hours to learn how to be a leader. 8 hours focused on the self, leadership improvement, leadership skills, yada, 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 leadership experience. 8 hours on everybody else. Who else is there? Who are my stakeholders? Who are my followers? Who am I trying to bring along? And 8 hours on the contexts, plural, within which I will necessarily be leading. 8, 8, and 8, and you will have a sense of how I, at least, bringing into the conversation, educating, training, and developing, and bearing in mind those all-important distinctions. That is my idea of how, if I were, which I am not, queen of the leadership world, we would be teaching how to lead in the third, almost the third decade of the 21st century.
Okay, thank you, Barbara, very much, and I hope tomorrow you can celebrate Argentinian goals.
I hope so. That's what I'm here for. Yes. Now you can clap. Thank you.
Disruption is ever present. To thrive,